Welcome to another AUG blog audio post located at augforums.com. That's augforums.com. You can find this specific audio post at augforums.com/audio post 2. That's audio post and the number 2. This is your host, Tim Rodman, coming to you live on Thursday, November 7th, 2019, from Columbus, Ohio, where it was pretty rainy today and expecting snow tonight. In this audio post, we are going to be talking about the Acumatica 2019 R2 launch series. I actually attended the final event in Columbus, Ohio, right here in town, which took place earlier today, here on November 7th. All total, there were 11 events across the country. They started off in Boston, Massachusetts on September 11th, then Philadelphia, Dallas, Bellevue, Washington, Portland, Oregon, Anaheim, California, Atlanta, Orlando, Florida, Chicago, New York, and finishing off here in Columbus. Now, I heard that actually the Columbus event was supposed to be last Thursday on October 31st, but I think the parents complained that they wanted to be trick-or-treating with their kids, so I think that's why they postponed it a week, and we finished up here today on November 7th. So what I saw in the Columbus event today, first of all, we got a John Roskell appearance, which was pretty cool. Of course, John Roskell is the CEO of Acumatica, and he doesn't go to all of these events, so I thought it was pretty cool that we got him here in Columbus. And I think it probably helps that Acumatica has an office here, so he got to visit that office, I'm sure, while he was in town. And he kicked off, said a few words. One thing he mentioned that caught my attention was that there were over 2,000 people across all the launch events across the country. Now, what I didn't catch is if he said 2,000 attendees or specifically 2,000 customers and prospects. I don't remember for sure, but we know at least 2,000 people across the country. And then he handed it off to Todd Coons, who runs the Columbus, Ohio office. And what I like to do during these types of presentations is I will take pictures of every slide and jot down some notes. And for whatever reason, it's easiest for me to do it on Twitter. So I just take it on my phone, tweet the picture with a little note about the picture, and then afterwards I roll it up into a blog post, just putting all the tweets together. And that way, if something catches your attention, you want to click in and see the screenshot, then you can do that. So I'll put a link to that blog post in the notes for this audio post. But just to walk you through some of the things that stood out to me. First of all, there was a slide showing that Acumatica has 5,200 plus customers. Now, that was the same number we saw back in January at the summit. But they also did an animated video slide that had kind of like business cards or company logos, and they just kept landing on the screen very quickly, and eventually there was this big pile. So they were actually real Acumatica customer logos that were on those pictures. And who knows how many there were. It's hard to tell. It went on for quite a while, but there were a lot of cards. So it'll be interesting to see. My guess would be that they update the official customer account number for us at the summit event coming up in Las Vegas. Another slide I like is the customer bill of rights. I think this has resonated with a lot of people. It's one thing to talk about next generation software. It's another thing to talk about how you treat your customers. And I think it's a well done slide worth taking a look at. There's one thing on there that always makes me chuckle, and that is there's a maximum of 3% price increase. And, if it was up to me, I'd probably want that number to be zero. But I guess with other vendors, maybe it's over 3%, so it's worth pointing that out. Next, there was various Acumatica offices. And one thing I thought was cool here was that the Columbus, Ohio office right here in town started with 2 people 6 years ago, and they're now up to 17 people. I actually used to work out of that office, the old office, and they just moved into a new office space earlier this year to accommodate their growth, and already they're having to expand out that office space. So I thought that was great sign. Things continue to grow there. And then other offices across the world, of course, Seattle, Washington is the headquarters. There's now a Portland, Oregon office, which I believe is a lot of the old Sage Timberline people who are now at Acumatica working on the construction edition. Of course, Timberline was headquartered out of that area. Then there's a Mexico City office, which originally started with the field service team of developers. Not sure where that's at now, but they definitely have an office there in Mexico City. There's also Montreal, Canada, where they run Montreal Labs. I think it's primarily developers doing various things, including working on ISV certifications. And then there's McLean, Virginia, the Washington, D.C. area. That was actually the original office. Also an office in South Africa. Of course, Moscow, Russia, where my guess is the majority of Acumatica employees are developers in that office. And then finally, Singapore. So nice global list of offices. I'm sure with the recent acquisition this past summer, you're just going to see that number continue to grow. Keep hearing things about Acumatica. That number continue to grow. Keep hearing things about Acumatica being able to utilize some of that IFS office space from their new sister company, IFS, out of Sweden. All right, a couple more things. I thought this was an interesting comment. I don't think this had dawned on me, but Todd Coons mentioned that the R1 release, which comes out around the summit, so we had 2019 R1 earlier this year, that release tends to be more OEM and more, this is my terminology, but more of the visionary kind of features, like enhancements to the platform and like cool new low code, no code type of stuff. More of that kind of features getting introduced. And that was the event today, the 2019 R2. That second release of the year tends to be more specifically requested features from customers and partners. And that's all primarily driven through the feedback.acumatica.com website. So I thought that was interesting. Difference between, a very general difference, of course, but between R1 and R2. And speaking of the releases, I can't remember who said this, but someone commented that there were over 600 pages of release notes, and I'm not sure where that number came from, because when I look at the release notes, I'll put a link on the post here to the release notes so you can count yourself. I count 183 pages, so I'm not sure where the 600 came from, but still 183 is pretty darn good. And I think most people, including my city, we just struggle to keep up with each new release. There's just so many new features that continue to get introduced. Now I will say that it was an interesting experience for me this time. This was my third roadshow or launch event this fall series that I personally have been to. And I used to get really, really excited about all the new features. And I don't know what it is, if I'm just getting numb to it, or I'm just expecting there to be a lot. I guess it's good and bad. On the one hand, It's not as exciting anymore. You're kind of numb to all the new stuff. But I think it's also good. I was trying to think of an analogy. It sort of feels to me like when you're getting in shape. Back in high school, I ran cross country, and in the summertime, that's when you have to put in all your training. And at first, it's hard just to run a couple miles, but eventually, the more you do it, the more you get in shape. And I feel like it's that way with Acumatica a little bit, especially when you're coming from a legacy product. You're just used to a much slower pace of the product evolving. It's a much faster pace with Acumatica, and at first it's overwhelming. I've heard the term feature fatigue. My friend Sean Slavin used that phrase, that it's easy to just get exhausted by all the new features. But, on the other hand, I think the more you hang around, the more you hang in there, you start to get used to it, and in a good way. And I think it's kind of like getting in shape. You just get used to a new pace, and you just come. You're voting for on feedback.acumatica.com are going to get introduced into the product, and you just get more and more accustomed to the pace that Acumatica runs at. So that was an interesting personal experience for me. That was the first time where I felt comfortable at the event, like I knew what to expect, and I wasn't completely blown away by the features, even though there continues to be a lot of features that get released in each new version. Now, I will say my personal favorite feature in 2019 R2 is not a real fancy one at all, but it's my personal favorite. And from a practical standpoint, when Acumatica introduced their modern user interface, which I believe was in 2017 R2, they still kept the old user interface around. You could flip back and forth because they didn't want to force the new user interface on people. And that wasn't terrible that you could flip back and forth. Where there was a problem was specifically on the security screens, but really any screen where you had to add something to a menu. It was just really confusing because it was a completely different structure with what they called the classic user interface. And in 2019 R2, they finally completely eliminated that classic user interface. So for me personally, from a practical standpoint, it was so confusing when you had someone really only seeing the modern user interface on the front end, but then still having to learn the old one behind the scenes, especially in the area of security. So from a practical standpoint, I like that feature. It's completely gone now, and there's just one user interface. It's got the workspaces on the left-hand side, and you see that same structure throughout the system. So we saw a demo with a bunch of new features and some slides where they tried to cram as many features as they could on a slide. There's just too many. You really have to go through the release notes to see them all. And then we wrapped up the event with a customer fireside chat. John Roskell got back on the stage and he moderated a little chat with 3 customers, and it was interesting to hear their perspective on various questions, especially about what their experience was going through their implementation and getting on to Acumatica. So just to wrap it up, some overall impressions. I like, even though you have this, you're blown away with these new features, release after release, I think you start to get used to it after a couple years. And I think one thing that helps is there's a consistent cadence. We know we've got an R1 coming in January, February, an R2 coming in September, October, and at least it's a consistent cycle, including the events themselves. I like the summit has consistently been at the end of January, and these road shows or launch events consistently come in the fall. And I like that. Some software vendors keep moving around their conferences or keep changing the names of their conferences. And I like this consistent cadence of end of January and then smaller events in the fall. Also, impression of steady growth with Acumatica. It doesn't seem to be like a mushroom cloud. It's definitely not stagnant, but just keeps building, keeps investing in the product, and keeps growing. And then last, that feedback.acumatica.com site got a couple mentions by Todd Kuhns, and I'm really liking that. We're seeing Acumatica pay more and more attention to that. Of course, as the community grows, you have more people contributing suggestions, voting on suggestions, leaving comments, and there's a lot of conversations happening there now, and we're really seeing it drive the new features. So we can actually see now in these, especially these R2 releases, that they're features that were specifically requested there on feedback.acumatica.com. All right, so it was a great event post. That'll do it. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you on the next AUG blog audio post.